Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq. This is July 12th, 2012. This program provides network security, news, highlights, and discussion on cyber threats, as well as countermeasures for those threats. Today we have joining us John Markley. John Markley is new to the program today, and welcome, John. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been with AT&T for about 22 years. I've worked in a lot of various and myriad jobs, but from a security perspective, I've had responsibility for firewalls and proxies, IDS, IPS, scanning, authentication services. Lately, I've been really focusing on vulnerabilities and making sure that the groups within AT&T, as well as the groups that manage customer services, know about vulnerabilities and that they know how to correct them. So that's been my primary focus, and I'm really moving hard in the last couple of months into mobility. So we're really focusing that type of effort into the mobile environment.
All right, great. And actually a very good move in that respect. It is a lot of the data services are moving into the mobility environment. There's new complexities there. I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit more. So welcome to the program. I'm Brian Rexroad, and let's go ahead and get into it here. I guess we'd probably be remiss if we didn't discuss a little bit about DNS Changer. And so the topic that I thought would be worthwhile to discuss today is particularly a blog that was posted by Chris Davies. And this is on SlashGear. And the title of it being DNS Changer Danger, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I found this to be an interesting perspective, one that I happen to agree with to a large extent, and it had to do with this sort of debate that is, was there too much warning put around DNS Changer? That is, those in the security community know well that DNS Changer is not by any stretch of the imagination the most malicious malware out there. It's not the most prolific malware out there. In fact, we discussed this on this program about a month or two ago about how Conficker, which is a much older infection, has been much more prolific and still is today. And there's certainly a lot of other pieces of malware that are much more malicious, doing bank fraud activities, where this one was basically doing just a sort of an advertising fraud activity. So the question is, how do you go about this? Well, and, why was this the case, I guess, perhaps? And I think some of this traces to the fact that this is one of the few cases, relatively speaking, where a true criminal investigation was able to continue and was able to grab, basically to identify the perpetrators behind this, initiate some arrests, and a particular situation with DNS Changer is it basically put the FBI in a position of trying to deal with a situation that is, if the servers that the criminals were operating were taken out of service, that the customers of that were infected, that the Internet users that were infected would have been basically have lost their access to the Internet right away. So they went through a lot of trouble to try to provide notifications to customers, working with ISPs, AT&T being one of those, and there were lots of others involved, to try to basically set up temporary servers in place for a period of time, get notifications out to those customers so that they could remediate their computers and moved on. So I outlined a little bit more of this, and basically it was in some of the commentary that was in my a recent blog of mine. It was actually really directed toward business customers, but a lot of consumers, home Internet users, basically happened across that article, and some less satisfied than others with the explanation that I provided. But in any case, interesting topic here. I don't know, John, do you have any thoughts or perspective on this?
Well, and that's the challenge. I mean, it had a lot of media hype, and like you mentioned, we have other, issues like Conficker or wherever that just don't get that much media, and part of it is because the FBI had such an ingrained attention-grabbing, we're going to do something, we're going to save you, and I think that has led to a lot of hype. But the good thing is, I think, and maybe this is what it boils down to, is that hype served a purpose, and that when they finally, after extending it a couple times, cut us all off from the DNS servers, the impacts were minor. Frankly, I didn't hear anything. I mean, I don't know, Brian, if you heard anything, but I heard no one impacted.
Well,
and that's ISPs doing their job. I mean, we're out there doing a lot of work to this, and we're making sure it's done, and that that the thing didn't cause a problem to our customers.
Well, actually, a good point, John. One of the little-known facts, and this is public information, is that most of the major ISPs have basically taken it upon themselves to continue service for those customers. So AT&T, for example, is basically redirecting DNS requests for those affected customers to AT&T's DNS servers now, and that's a temporary measure that will continue through the end of the year as we continue with notifications to those customers and try to reduce the impact of those. It's a very small percentage of customers that are affected by that, but it's still the case.
And then you hit it right in the head. I mean, we're telling these customers, you got something you can do to fix yourself, and we can't do it for them. We just can't, not long term, especially in this regards. But we can't fix their machine having a virus on it. Mm-hmm. They have to do that themselves, and so they're doing it. And I think that's the good thing about the hype is it's getting the attention by the customers that when we send them an email that says or call them or whatever to say fix this, that they're actually doing it because they know what it means.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So this is a situation where they were able to actually do something about this criminal activity, basically get it in a position where they were able to stop that activity, needed to do some remediation around that, and making sort of getting the information out to the public was one of the challenges, but also one of the things that sort of created a lot of this hype around this. Another sort of challenge that we had debated, in fact, all along in this activity is that the tendency is that the folks that hear the most about this problem are probably the ones that need the information the least. And by that, I mean the folks that are infected that don't know they're infected, it's partly because they're not really paying attention, for the most part, to the security issues that they need to pay attention to as a owner of a computer. So, in some respects, getting it out to the mainstream media, all of the major networks had news information about this thing. It helped quite a bit to get more folks, exposed to the fact, but it's still a very difficult challenge. That is, a lot of the hype really gets sort of promulgated around the security community. It's very difficult to get it outside of that community and further, and that's, again, what created such a large amount of hype, is getting it to the national news networks. But
do you think, Brian, that some of the, I guess the media attention is necessary just because, like you said, the FBI is spending money. They're spending a lot of time to make this happen, and they need to justify it. But they got that attention, and that helps them say, hey, yeah, we are doing something for you. So
that's sort of true. I'm going to push back just a little bit on that. I don't think that was really the primary motivation here.
No, it's not, but it's something to think about, right?
It is something to think about, I suppose. But I have seen cases where there has been a lot of hype generated just for promoting an organization. I don't think that was a situation here because having been sort of part of a lot of the debate around this, it really was about trying to get the information out to users so that they could do the remediation. One of the few cases where there's been an opportunity to actually stop this type of crime, this is one group. There are many others that are doing cyber criminal type activities, and taking advantage of that opportunity was a good thing. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the next topic here. Interesting one. We talked about sort of a permutation of this a little while ago. I think it was sort of a separate topic, but this is a blog by Prasad Gupta from McAfee. And what he's talking about is sort of new security risks associated with Windows 8 Metro. And really what this is about is, some time ago we had talked about how mobile devices generally have very small displays. Tablets are kind of an in-between space. But what tends to happen is if you have a long URL that you're visiting on a website, for example, a good portion of that URL may be cut off. So if you happen across a phishing site or something, the portion of the URL that you actually are able to see as you're web browsing, for example, might be truncated to the point where you might believe that you're visiting a legitimate site, but in fact there may be characters that are hidden that would have otherwise revealed that you're visiting a phishing site or some malicious site or somebody that's sort of posing to look like somebody else. And his concern here that he expressed, perhaps among some other things, is that is sort of becoming a standard, so to speak, as a part of the Windows 8 operating system. That is, what they're trying to do is make that operating system so it scales from very small devices to very our typical desktop computers, and as a consequence, hiding some information that we typically would use to help validate that we're visiting a legitimate site.
So, and then the challenge there too is, I know I ran into this with a friend of mine's PC, is they had turned that window off, and so when you go and say, hey, type this URL in, or what URL are you at, they don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
they have a lot of
a challenge.
Yeah, and it was a question I asked them. I said, okay, hey, where are you at? To see you're seeing this, weird message they were getting, and they said, well, I don't know. I said, well, read me the URL. What do you mean? I don't have that box anymore.
Right, and a good exercise has always been, if you're reading an email message or something of that sort, there may be a link inside that email message. The first step is to just sort of mouse over any links that are there. Take a closer look at what that link is really pointing to. And that's a lot more difficult when you have a small display or using a touchpad display or something along those lines. So I think we still have some user interface challenges ahead of us, particularly as we move to more mobile environments. And for the time being, hopefully Windows 8 is going to address this type of issue. I hope it's certainly on their mind. I'd hate to think that that security is getting sort of back shelved as they move forward with the operating system, because I have to say, at least in my opinion, I think Microsoft has done quite a bit to advance the security of the Microsoft platforms, but this is one where it seems they have a miss so far based on what this blog says.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, I think you had something you'd like to discuss with us today. Where would you like to start?
Yeah, this one's a tough one. And I like the screen. That this is a blog from Lookout, and Lookout's a company that a lot of companies rely on and perceive as industry experts. We have had a lot of interest in a lot of news articles, and if you pay attention to the media from a security perspective, about that there's this botnet that's caused by our Android phones, and not just ours in AT&T, but just ours as consumers. And how is that happening? There's a lot of question about, really, is there a botnet out there? Is it an SMS botnet? Is it mail? Where are they coming from? All that stuff is kind of a question. Where does it actually originate from? And so there's a lot of this overall, investigation, suppositions, accusations in some cases of where is it coming from, and one of the concerns that have come up, and I hope to talk about a little bit more, some other time too, is that the devices that we get have a lot of security features involved in them, like our Android phones, our iPhones. I mean, all this stuff has all these smartphones, Windows Mobile. They have a lot of nice features, and we don't always enable them. And some of those have a consequence. And although I think that we can say, in this regard, the Yahoo Mail client, which is what Lookout points to, even though, yes, it's probably not the cause, or it's probably not involved in this Android botnet, the fact that it has a security feature that is probably not well known to the users, where it's not on by default, where all they got to do is go in and say, I want to encrypt all my messages in and out, not just my passwords, but also the actual contents of the messages. And that will save the potential for somebody either hijacking the session, for pulling information that you don't want to share. It's those types of settings that, security professionals, we always just say, turn them all on. Turn it on, get it going, and then turn them off if you can't get something to work. And this is a good example, is I think that, the recommendations that are coming out from Lookout and others is that, turn this Yahoo Mail encryption on, and they give a good explanation on how to do that. But also I think you need to look at other devices, all your devices, and say, make sure that, locator services are turned on when you want them to be turned on. Make sure that, encryption is turned on when you want it to be turned on. And really pay attention to that because, as we talked earlier, Brian, when you said mobile devices are becoming de facto standard. I mean, we're not going to see the desktops. We're not going to see the laptops like we did. We're going to see tablets. And, from a perspective of that, we need to treat these machines as if they were, real computers and treat them as security devices and make sure they're there. And sometimes it might impact how you use it. But in general, it's going to work, to keep you safe.
Yeah, so this is sort of an interesting perspective here. So, John, do you have any thoughts on why they don't just have the encryption turned on by default? I mean, I have sort of my own opinions, but I'm curious.
Well, it's opinion, right? It's not real. I haven't talked to Yahoo. I haven't talked to these vendors, in a while about this type of thing, and Yahoo not at all. I think some of it is just it adds a little layer of complexity. So if there is a problem or there is a challenge with how it works, you want to try and minimize the potential. To me, it's really just boils down to what's easy to implement. I mean, and I hate to say it that way because it sounds so negative, but it is. It's easier to make it all happen and work without a problem if you turn off encryption and turn off, extra passwords or whatever. But in the end, I think that's going to bite us, especially with these mobile devices. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where you were going, Brian, but that's kind of my thought.
Well, I think there are some practical but subtle reasons why they perhaps don't turn it on automatically. One is that it puts greater load on the servers. That is, they have to do the key exchange process. There are more transactions that need to take place. They have to have enough encryption modules in place. They have to manage the certificates. I guess they have to manage those anyway, but managing them across perhaps more servers to be able to handle the load. And having it as an option may be, in fact, one of the indicators to Yahoo and to other organizations. This isn't necessarily specific to Yahoo, but to see to what extent customers are paying attention to security and to what extent it's of an interest to them. So if customers aren't enabling this feature, then they kind of assume, well, security is not important to that customer, and maybe we can provide applications that are perhaps more flexible, easier to use at the expense of security. So these are sort of trade-offs. I think your point is well taken. That is, if users want to send a message, one way to do that is to make sure you enable these kinds of features. It does take a little extra effort on users' part to make sure that they understand what security features are available and make sure they get used.
Yeah, well, and you hit it right, too, on the head. It's not just the resources. Encryption is a good overhead, even on your mobile device, and our old BlackBerries and cell phones definitely couldn't handle it, the old stuff, right? And even the old iPhones probably couldn't handle the newer encryption, But the stuff that's coming out today, it's not going to have a problem with most of these encryption algorithms. I wouldn't. It takes probably a heck of a lot of overhead to create that problem on the device itself. So
that's probably true. I think to a large extent, most of the CPU power is spent on graphics generation as opposed to encryption. But certainly, if a user gets a lot of email, if they, it's going to have some impact on battery life, and battery life is one of those sort of precious commodities associated with mobile devices. So, good point. I think that's still another sort of factor to consider from a practical point of view. In any case, we believe security is an important part of it. I'm sure a lot of our viewers here think the same thing as well.
Yep.
So I would tend to turn it on. Okay, John. So I think you have some information about some patching trends. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So hopefully on the screen, you'll see this chart about the alerts issued by Microsoft, and I don't really pick on Microsoft too much, but I mean we just did have Microsoft Tuesday. It was a pretty good sized one, and they're a world class company that does a heck of a job keeping up with the security issues. They're attacked constantly trying to find vulnerabilities. So we tend to try and look for things, and use Microsoft as a barometer. So the thing is this, since June of 2010, we see, an overall up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, a patching, and it's kind of tailoring off. And I think that, if you look at the trend, it's a downward trend. And I think that's not necessarily something that means much, but it does mean that, that we're getting less alerts from them, and hopefully they're bundling together, but maybe it's becoming more and more secure. And, the overall, output and the controls that we have are getting better. Mm-hmm. If you just break down the critical alerts, we do have a slight, it's kind of going up just a hair. If you look at this chart again, slide upward trend in just the critical alerts, and certainly look at March and late November, December of 2011, it was kind of ugly. But in general, it's been pretty good. Now, I don't try to differentiate between servers and desktops, so of course the majority of these are desktop. That goes without saying, but it is something to think about.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a moment here, John. My interpretation of a critical alert is basically that it turned out to be a zero-day exploit. That is, they didn't know about the vulnerability when the patching was needed. It turned into the exploit and was basically in practice for use to gain access to systems, sometimes critical systems. And that is the kind of thing that I've tended to see as coming out as a critical patch item. And so, another way of looking at this, that sort of downward trend in terms of vulnerabilities, may be a sort of a weakening in the vulnerability identification activity, whereas the zero-day exploits are kind of going up just a little bit. I don't think that's a strong trend at this point. Clearly, there's a lot of spikiness in these graphs here, but just another thing to sort of watch out for, and maybe that's a sign that maybe the vulnerability identification activities need to strengthen a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I agree. So the kind of the next thing I was going to talk about is really is what do these charts mean? They don't mean Microsoft's a world-class company. They have that interest. I mentioned that that they're a barometer of it. We could see things like fewer patches, maybe more stuff. Is already fixed. Or is simply calling the things critical. That never were critical. But it is. It's a. I don't think that we want to look at those charts and think that we're doing, that Microsoft or any of us are doing anything wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just that we need to keep on patching. The requirements to patch aren't going away. In fact, when you talk about mobile devices, it's extremely important. And we talked about this earlier, when we talked about the lookout stuff with the Yahoo Mail and everything else, is that the controls rely upon the user awareness, the user's ability to do the controls and the patching. And so, our smartphones all our devices are intended to be phones first. Some of them may be a little bit more media-oriented, but they're really phones. And so mobile computing and security functions are not always the primary focus. Some of that paradigm's changing a little bit, but it really was never originally done that way. And
so, John, you make a good. I think you're making a good point, and I think sort of to extend upon that maybe a bit. I think we've sort of grown up with the whole notion of adding software, and even if you go way back, floppy disk, putting a floppy disk in a computer, installing software, getting updates to the software, that sort of thing. That is sort of deeply entrenched in the culture of computers, whereas phones have not had that sort of, if we go back to, literally, you go back 50 years, nobody did an update on a phone. And the mindset is still, I think, that mobile devices are thought of as phones. We even call them phones, a smartphone. And even though they've gotten smarter and we've started adding apps and things like that, there still is not a fundamental mindset that the thing needs to be updated and, perhaps plugged into a USB device or synced with an app to make sure that not just the apps are updated, but the operating system underneath that gets updated as well. I think we've talked about that a couple of, or perhaps a few other times in this program, and I think your point is very well taken.
Yeah, and the thing to think about too is that we are becoming a society, and computing is becoming a society of cloud-based architecture, and so our phones, our tablets, our whatever are really going to become our computer of choice, and so we're going to have to make sure that they're secure, because the laptops with it running the antivirus and the desktops, they're not going to be around as much as they used to be, and so we just got to really make sure. The key element, and I know you talked about this before, Brian, is bring your own device. That's the next thing on the radar, right? Is that you're going to go into your business and you're going to say, okay, I want go ahead and use your own iPad or your own tablet and start. That's your computer. It's your personal device, and those initiatives are really getting prevalent out there. And if we can't keep the security at that level, then we're going to have to make sure.
Yeah, the trend seems to be going in the direction that just like we've readily accepted the fact that we drive our own car to work when we go into the office each day, or wherever our workplace might be, in fact, that many enterprises are looking to have users be able to use their own selected mobile device in their work environment, and hopefully be able to use that in the context of work as well. And that is a challenge from a security policy point of view, making sure that there are even perhaps some legal implications around that to make sure that the rights of one organization are protected as well as the personal use. So very challenging activity. A lot of organizations are going that way. It's obviously a big cost-saving measure for businesses, but
I don't know. And the thing to consider is that malware, that those viruses and Trojan horse programs are getting bigger. That's becoming the mechanism of choice. You look at, and I got a couple things to quote here. Juniper Research says that malicious attacks against Android skyrocketed, almost 3.5% during the last 7 months of 2011. F-Secure, it shows almost 4 times the amount of malware families in the first quarter 2012 compared to first quarter 2011. And we're not talking 10. We're not talking 2. We're talking thousands. Of attacks and new attacks against these devices, and the malware is becoming more and more prevalent. There's, the stuff gets on the Google Play Store. Luckily, Apple's kind of avoided this, but the Android market's becoming a really good target, and it used to be Symbian used to be the target for the malware, and it's becoming Android.
Yeah. You suggested that Apple's been lucky. I think it's a little more than luck here. I think that
I know. I say
that is enforcement of the market, and
this is you have to run their. They very well peruse the information, but it's coming. But I think the key is that for our audience here is that even jailbreakers, jailbreaking your phone. It happens. Rooting your phone happens. But you guys, you need to patch. Because
you're taking on a system administrator role by doing that. There's a responsibility associated with it.
And I like the words to live by, that I pulled off of Matt Leibowitz's article that he did in June of 2012. And, basically he says that, we think about, patching, and we kind of relegate it to kind of a minor status. But you think about it, and you used the car analogy before, using new software, if the manufacturer recalls the brakes on your car, you don't go out and drive it. So if a manufacturer tells you, hey, this piece of software, this operating system or this package has got a problem, you want to get it fixed, just like you'd fix the brakes in your car. And I love this quote. It's not just for Microsoft. It's for every product. So it's something I think that we need to recognize that as consumers and as security professionals is that it's not just the PCs, it's not just the devices. Just if you see a patch, an update, like you said, hook it up, sync up your phone, sync up your tablet, whatever, all the time, and check for updates because they're trying to help you.
Yep, absolutely. All right, thanks, John. Some good discussion there. let's go ahead and take a look at the Internet weather for the last week or so here. I have a relatively brief view. This actually looks very similar to what we had talked about 2 weeks ago. We didn't record a program last week, but there is some interesting trend here that extends well into last week. And we've reported on this for several weeks now, and a lot of this activity, I'm going to call it a security surveillance DVRBot. This is basically a botnet that, for the most part, of what we've been able to identify so far, it's security surveillance camera DVRs that are being exploited and turned into participants in a botnet. And I'm showing 30 days of activity here, and what we're really looking at is basically the top 50 ports that had been identified as being scanned for reconnaissance purposes, that is basically looking for machines that will respond to these ports on the Internet. Now, I think the purview of the number of ports that were actually scanned is well over 100, if not beyond that, but I basically just took the top 50 that were generating anomalies from our reporting over the last week or so. And just as a point of review, there are participants in this botnet from a variety of countries. China, Korea, India are some of the notable ones. U.S. has a prominent number as well. As I said, they're associated with the security camera DVRs. We are aware of a specific product type that is associated with this. It is apparently available under multiple brands. Part of that may be sort of country-specific. We're not at a point where we want to disclose who that is at this point. And over this last period of time here, basically what we're looking at in this graph is the number of sources that are doing scanning activity on the variety of ports that are a part of this graph. Basically what we're seeing here is there's, at least from this perspective, no apparent growth in size. Now, in the last report a couple of weeks ago, we basically shown that there was a growth in activity, but the peak in activity in terms of the number of sources that were doing scanning is just a little over 12,000 picked up in this analysis. We're not seeing much of an upward trend, so I don't know if that means they've sort of hit a saturation point and haven't been able to find additional exploitable machines. That could be a motivator for what they've been doing over the last couple of weeks, which is to scan lots and lots of ports, hopefully to find maybe devices that are using alternative ports, or find new types of devices that have embedded software or operating systems that they might be able to exploit in the future. So this is something that we're paying some close attention to, and in fact getting ready to pay even more close attention to, because it does have the potential to get worse.
Hey, Brian, so how are you identifying that these are associated with DVRs? Is it just because the ports are commonly known by the cameras, or is it?
Very good question. So the sources of activity here, the IP addresses that are doing this reconnaissance activity are identifiable with flow data. And from that, basically, we have been able to identify that there's a very, very strong correlation between web-accessible surveillance cameras and these IP addresses. So it's that's basically how we've been able to associate it with that. What is more challenging in this case is identifying more specifically what models and types have this. We are not doing anything beyond just verifying that they're web-accessible applications.
Okay.
We're not trying to access those devices, for example. So this is just another perspective of the same activity I just shown, but rather than show the number of sources that were doing the scanning activity, this is looking at scan probes or flows associated with that activity. And it's at the very least a very colorful graph. It shows activity starting up around just the end of July 4th, more aggressive activity starting on the 6th. Now, as I pointed out earlier, I only took the top 50 basically that were active over the last week or so. So even though we're showing 30 days of data, there was actually activity prior to this time period on other ports that is not shown in this graph. So this doesn't necessarily accurately reflect when this sort of aggressive scanning activity took place. It more accurately reflects what's going on over the last week or so. And you can see sort of the volume. And we've seen certainly more aggressive scanning than this, but we certainly haven't seen it very often on this many ports. One particular port that's sort of notable here is port 3306. This is associated with MySQL application. And again, this activity appears to be associated with that particular botnet as well. We saw on the order of about 7,500 sources that were scanning on this port, and this one is notable partly because there was a pretty serious vulnerability that was recently posted associated with this application. It was an authentication bypass vulnerability. We don't know if that was the motivator for picking out this port for scanning. As I said, there are lots and lots of ports that they are scanning, ones that have really oftentimes no registered applications associated with those. So this is one I just wanted to point out because there was a recent critical vulnerability report associated with that that would allow perhaps somebody to bypass authentication. Next item here is looking at the top 10 most probed ports, and this one is fairly typical in terms of the most probed ports. The one thing to note here is that the other category is much more expanded than typical. Otherwise, fairly typical. Port 22, SSH, port 80, TCP, that's web applications, perhaps looking for vulnerable websites that aren't accessible through search engines, for example. Port 23, TCP, 3389, TCP, that being remote desktop protocol, and 1433, that's Microsoft SQL database. Now, this particular graph, the next one that is looking at the most sources doing the probing, this one is very different than usual, and that is predominantly because of the activity that we had just talked about. That is, it identifies several ports that are typically not on our list of top scanners: 5003, 4000, 3703, 3690, and 4001. We typically don't see those ports being scanned aggressively or by lots of different sources. There are a couple of typical ones: port 23 TCP as well as port 445 TCP that are typically on this graph. And as with the other, there are lots of the other category here is expanded significantly because of the many other ports that were being probed. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. As always, we welcome feedback. In fact, one of the things I neglected to note, if you do have an interest in understanding a little bit more about what those other ports are, I didn't expand on that top 50 list or so. If you do have an interest in that, please contact us at ThreatTraq at list.att.com. And you can also find this program. You can get this program from the tech channel. AT&T tech channel is att.com/ThreatTraq. It's also available from YouTube. It's in audio versions from iTunes and FeedBurner. And I want to thank you, John, for participating today.
Thanks, Brian, for having me.
And look forward to having you back sometime in the future. And thanks, everyone, for joining us here at AT&T ThreatTraq. I'm Brian Rexroad, and until next time, please keep your network safe.